Welcome back to another Monster Hunter Rise tutorial. Today we are going to be talking about the longsword, and this is a very fun weapon to use. It's very beginner friendly, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. Alright, this is now the third time that I'm recording this, and it's getting pretty tedious, so we're just going to run straight through it. So we're going to start with our Y moves, our B moves, and so forth. So our Y moves are going to be a step slash, another overhead, and then a thrust rising, and repeat those three. Whereas if we only put in the B attacks, it's just going to repeat those two attacks. Our YB attack is going to be a fade slash, which we can use directionally, only left and right, and backwards, not forward. This is going to turn lateral if we input a button before it. Otherwise, we're just going to go straight back. As you can see, we have the gauge up there on the right of our sharpness. That is going to be the main mechanic of the longsword. So we're going to be using our Y and B attacks to kind of fill it up. And then when we are ready, we use right trigger to expend that and move up in a gauge level. So there's two pieces of the gauge that we need to look at. So we have the white piece of the gauge now and the kind of lighter inside blue-gray. The color on the outside is going to determine the gauge level, and the inside is going to determine how much ammo, per se, that we have for the Spirit Blade. So the Spirit Blade is going to be that 4 combo that you just saw, and if you'll notice, the fourth one is the only one that actually matters and moves us up a gauge level. So we're going to go from nothing to white, white to yellow, and yellow to red. So in order to do that, we just have to land the fourth attack, and I'll show you that here. If I just miss all the other attacks, if the fourth one lands, we will move up a color. So as you can see, we are now at red. This is the highest gauge level, and we can do the most here. And this is actually going to increase our attack and elemental attack by a flat 12%. The only other basic move that we need to talk about is a foresight slash. Now, in World, they did nerf this to make it so that you had to have gauge ammo, the inside gauge, to be able to successfully pull this off. But what it is going to do is going to input, right trigger, and B. And if you notice that blue flash and kind of ping there, that'll let you know that you have successfully foresight slashed. And the way it works is it'll take all of your ammo away. If you counter an attack, it will give it all back, and then you can move straight into Spirit Blade 4, raising your gauge level up. So when you do it, you just have to make sure you put in an input, and then foresight. Once you get that blue ping, you know you are good and you have successfully countered. That means you can move forward with the Spirit Round Slash. If you do not successfully counter, you will be stuck in that attack and nothing will happen. That will look like this. I'm clicking right trigger and I cannot move into Spirit Round Slash. I also didn't have ammo, so it's not a very good example, but you get the idea. Let's go ahead and talk about the Drawn Double Slash, Spirit Reckoning combo, and the Sacred Sheath combo. The Drawn Double Slash is going to replace your opening attack from the Sheath position, and that is going to look like that. That'll grant you Hyper Armor, which means you can move through an attack while you use it. I'm horrible at timing these, but they'll look like that. Surprised I actually pulled that off on the first go. And then your Spirit Reckoning combo and Sacred Sheath are going to affect your Spirit Blade combo and your Sheath. Now, technically, the Special and Sacred Sheath are part of the basic moves, but I left the Special Sheath out just to show you how they compare to each other. So let's go ahead and look at the Spirit Reckoning combo. Spirit 1 and 2 are the same, but as you can see, the Dividing Slash is Spirit Blade 3, and that'll do a right to left slash. And this slash can actually close a gap, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Spirit Blade 4 is going to go from Dividing Slash to 2 overheads. Again, if you notice, the final attack is going to be the one that will raise our gauge level up to red or whatever color you are going into. Now, Spirit Blade 3 Dividing Slash can move forward, and that will look like this. And that will help you close the gap a little bit. So let's talk about the Special Sheath really quick, and then we will talk about the Sacred Sheath. So the Special Sheath is, again, you're going to have to use this after you input an attack, and you're going to hit right trigger and A. From here, you are either going to have to hold and let it automatically sheath, or you can do two things. You can do an EI Slash, which will then passively recover your gauge. In Iceborne, this did actually have Hyper Armor, so you can move through an attack with this, but it no longer does in Rise. And the other piece of this is the counter. So when you hit right trigger and A, you're going to hit right trigger again to counter an attack. You'll notice that I was at yellow, and then after successfully countering, I did go up to red. That is the important change that they made from Iceborne to Rise. In Iceborne, if you failed to counter, you would go down 1 gauge level. If you successfully countered, you would keep the gauge level. Now in Rise, instead of punishing you for missing a counter, they reward you for getting a good counter, meaning if they don't knock you down a level anymore, As you can see here, I will waste a counter, and I didn't go down to yellow. Let's go ahead and talk about the Sacred Sheath. So this one's going to be a little bit different, and we are going to want to have a gauge for this one up to red. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. So there's quite a few pieces of this Sacred Sheath we actually need to look at, and a lot of them have to do with counters. So the first piece we're going to look at is, again, inputting a button before we can do it, and then you can see we are thrusting the sword into its sheath. And from there are two different things that can happen. We can actually perform a counter while using this, meaning if I manually release here, it will counter, and I can move into Spirit Blade 4. Or we can let it counter on its own if I don't do anything, and it will save us from an attack, but it will drain our gauge level by 1. Whereas the fully sheath option, we are going to then drain our gauge completely. This is going to be a Sacred Sheath focus, and it is going to be a release slash when we let go. We can evade around, and it is a full directional hit, so I can turn around and hit it straight back if I wanted to. Just to prove that, we're going to go over here. I'm facing this rock, and there's another counter that we can do here. As soon as we release this attack, it will counter. However, we do not need to counter with this weapon for anything to happen. It will just save us from a hit. But this is going to be one of the strongest attacks in the game, and is the strongest in the longsword kit. So it's going to look like this. The animation will change based on how many gauge levels you consume, but that is the level 3 one. That about does it for all the switch skills. Let's go ahead and look at these silk binds now. So Soaring Kick is what we're going to start off with at 4, and then use Sakura Slash and Tempered Spirit Blade. Something important to note, Soaring Kick will drain our gauge level, while Sakura Slash and Tempered Spirit Blade will actually give it back. And then Serene Pose will also drain 1, but Harvest Moon will help us with our gauge recovery. You'll notice that if we go back up to red really quick, that was pretty badly timed, but it got it anyway. So now that we're at red, we can perform a Soaring Kick. You do not need to be at red, but of course this is going to maximize the damage that we are doing. So make sure that you are at red as much as you can. Again, this is a 12% increase of both elemental and raw damage. So, to perform this, of course, all Wirebugs are going to be left trigger, and then we're going to hit Y. This is going to... That's not the Soaring Kick. This is going to be the Veteran's Helm Splitter. So we are going to vault to the monster and then do a plunging thrust. That on its own is just going to give us passive recovery for our gauge, but then if we hold down right trigger while we are doing it, we will do our Helm Breaker. You can special sheath from there and continue moving through the attacks, but you cannot use any of your Spirit Blade combo. Our Silkbind Sakura Slash is going to be the exact same attack from Generations, but this time this is going to increase our gauge level up to yellow, and then we can use it again because it is a one Wirebug attack. I know you can't see that because I have Infinite on, just for the convenience of shooting this video for the third time because I'm about done with this video. But it will hit twice along the monster, and it will do a bunch of attacks after that. Yes, his game just crashed and he had to record an extra 10 minutes of content for this tutorial while OBS was on pause, so it didn't even record any of it, and I thought the guide was going really well up to that point. So let's go ahead and turn the stomping back on and jump right back into the 5th recording of this stupid video. So, as you'll notice, I am having some display issues. I don't know what that's about, but the X, Y, and A buttons all look a little weird. I'm not sure what that is, but let's go ahead and continue with the video. We're going to talk about the Tempered Spirit Blade, as well as the Harvest Moon and Serene Pose. So let's go ahead and talk about the Tempered Spirit Blade. This is going to be a counter, and it's going to be left trigger Y. It's going to look like that, and it is going to send you into your Spirit Blade if you choose. It is going to increase your gauge level by 1 per counter, and it is personally my favorite Silkbind to use outside of Serene Pose. Well, let's go ahead and talk about Serene Pose. So while Tempered Spirit Blade is going to give you a gauge level increase, Serene Pose is always going to decrease it by 1. This is a 2-wire bug with a very slow recovery, but it is the strongest counter that we have in the Longsword's kit, and it is paired pretty well with Tempered Spirit Blade because they are both counters, and using Harvest Moon with this is going to make it pretty spicy, but we'll get to Harvest Moon here soon. So you're going to want to be using Tempered Spirit Blade as a counter and a gauge level increase, and then you're going to want to be using Serene Pose as a counter on its own. So Harvest Moon is going to cast an Iron Silk ring around you, and there's a few things to note right off the bat. If you run into this, it'll knock you back. If you Wirefall and get out of it, or if you run into it twice, it'll automatically end. If you are knocked back by a monster, it will automatically end. If at any point you sheath your weapon, it will automatically end. So where you're going to definitely want to stay inside the circle, have the monster in the circle too. You can see it's relatively big, but when the monster is as big as this, it is kind of hard to make it stay in here, especially if you're playing in a team. So just be wary of that. So the first thing to note about this is that my spirit blades are not using any ammo at all. Using Harvest Moon is going to automatically max out our gauge ammo, and then we can use infinite spirit blades while we are inside the ring. But the other thing that it does that truly draws out the longsword's potential is it gives every counter in the longsword's kit extra hits. So that is going to be anything from Serene Pose to Tempered Spirit to Foresight. As you can see, there was 3 extra hits there. There's an extra few after that. The extra returning hits then generate more. Let's go ahead and talk about some of these skills now. So, Quick Sheath is going to be an absolute must for this. This is going to help with all your sheath attacks. It's going to make it relatively instant, and for the Sacred Sheath, it is going to make it much faster, which means you are not stuck in that animation waiting for nearly as long, and that is going to be very helpful because both of those animations can get you hit pretty quickly, as well as cause you to miss some easy counters that if you just had half a second longer, you would have been able to hit. So Quick Sheath is a very helpful skill for the longsword because it does affect your Special Sheath and Sacred Sheath attacks. So Maximum Might is actually a universal skill. I usually don't include the affinity boosting ones unless they're specific to a weapon, like Rapid Morph for instance. But this one has good synergy with Longsword because Longsword doesn't really use stamina as much, and this one increases your affinity by up to 30% when you have your stamina maxed out for 4 seconds, and it instantly goes away if you use any stamina. So it was 4 seconds back in Iceborne, and I'm not sure if that's still the exact number that is required to give you the buff, but since Longsword is only really using stamina when you're evading during your Sacred Sheath release, this is a pretty good way to increase your affinity. Power Prolonger, of course, is going to affect the Longsword's gauge duration, and Focus is going to increase the fill rate of your gauge by 20%. Mind's Eye, again, another universal skill, but this is probably the most frustrating weapon to sit there and bounce off a monster for, so if you are finding yourself bouncing off a monster a lot, go ahead and just throw some Mind's Eye on there and it might help you a lot. And finally, we have the Critical Draw skill. This is going to affect all of your Sacred and Special Sheath attacks, and that's going to make this extremely important because, as you can see, it goes up to 60% affinity, which is 60% critical chance. Pairing this with Maximum Might can give you an instant 90% critical chance on top of whatever your weapon's inherent affinity is. So that about does it for the Longsword video. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to leave a comment down below if you have any questions or requests for tutorial videos. I will be doing all of the Rise weapons, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And if anybody's wondering about the armor and weapon, this is the Chaotic Gore Magala Longsword skin and the Astalos Armor. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one.